Well, I think that all addicts don't like pain. They've grown up probably in very painful situations and experienced, usually a lot of abuse as children or as adults in school or wherever. And they've learned to cope with that woundedness and pain by medicating it, so to speak, with a substance or some kind of behavior that takes away that pain. In fact, there was a study that was done recently which suggested that the more pain you experienced growing up, the more likely it will be that you have multiple addictions. So that the more pain you have, the more solutions or coping you'll have, and that's where addicts get themselves into trouble.
With that in mind, I want each of y'all to tell what was the pain in your life that led to your addiction. Brenda?
Well, I grew up in a family that went to church all the time. And we looked really good on the outside. But what happened on the inside of our home was quite different. I had a mother that was very compulsive and a little bit crazy, and everything had to be done perfectly. And a dad that worked compulsively and was gone a lot. And what happened with me was my mom doted over me, and my dad was real involved with the other kids in the family, but basically didn't have a lot to do with me when I was very young. So there was a lot of confusion in the home, and that's basically where my pain came from. And when I got to be teenage years, I started using drugs and alcohol and trying to control my eating by either not eating at all or by throwing up everything I ate to try to control my environment and try to ease my pain.
Alan?
I believe for me, Pat, my pain was my first molestation by my female cousin. And then when I was 12, it happened by a male, a family friend, and that's when my drinking started. It was an opportunity for me to escape what was going on. It was my fault. Was I straight or was I gay? I went through all those gamut of emotions, and later on when I played sports in high school, I had bragging rights because it was a female, but I never talked about the male aspect of when it happened until I did my fourth step. Yeah.
John?
In my family, there was a lot of chaos. My parents had a lot of their own issues that they were trying to take care of. And as a result, there was a lot of what I would call emotional neglect. And I had to figure out a way to how to handle the pain of what I eventually came to find out was that I had a core belief that I was unlovable, that I wasn't valuable because my folks were spending so much time working on their own stuff, trying to fill their own pain in their lives, that they didn't have really the time to let me be who I was. So that was the biggest one for me.
When I was very small, I was sexually abused, and that taught me some confusion about the relationship between love, nurture, and sexuality. But I think the power of my later sexual addiction was what Alan is calling neglect, and I've always called abandonment. There were people in my family that were not giving me the love, nurture, and attention that would have been helpful for a person to thrive. So that part of my addiction is looking for love, nurture, and attention in sexuality, and that's where I got lost, starting around age 11.
Okay. Debbie?
Well, while I'm not an addict here at the table, I would be labeled a co-addict in the 12-step environment. I am married to Mark, so I am a spouse of an addict. But there is no doubt that I also have carried pain in my life, and although my behaviors or substances that I've chose have not become addictive, there is no doubt that I still use behaviors to cope with my pain. I would say that my pain, most of it comes, I believe, from actually being a twin growing up. And my twin was very outgoing and vivacious and talented. In my eyes, I was never quite as good as. And I believe I didn't really have a safe place to be able to talk about a lot of those feelings. So I carried into my life, I think, a lot of those feelings of not being adequate and not being good enough and not being valued enough. And so I also had that struggle of just not knowing how to talk about that pain.
Pat?
For me, I was the oldest of 4 children, and as early as I can remember,
I felt different. I never felt like I belonged or fit in anywhere. I had to put on a front or a facade. And I remember in first grade I had an eye problem. I had to wear an eye patch, and I felt very different at school, and I would take the patch off and hide it and put one back on when I went home. But I felt different. And being the oldest of 4 children, I grew up in a very Christian, very religious type home, but it was very loveless in there. There was no emotion between my parents, and I never felt like I achieved my father's approval or attention. And so everything I did was around being an overachiever, but it always fell short, and I always had pain in the inside, and I did not like the way I felt naturally. And when I found alcohol at the age of 13, suddenly I was filled up with warmth, and the world was better, and I didn't want to feel like that some of the time. I wanted to be like that all the time, and that started a drinking and drugging career, let's say. Thanks.
Al?
Like Brenda, I grew up in the perfect family. That was the image that we were taught to portray, but on the inside it was something completely different. And I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like that I was not worthy, that I was unlovable, and that the pain of that, not knowing how to deal with it, led me to a road of sex addiction. And then I began using food to medicate the pain of the sex addiction.